The time now is 8:12, and last week was tough for Texans, but the hardships continue for many Houston area students in need daily. Up next, the organization that's helping strengthen equity in education.
While Houstonians were placed in survival mode last week, that experience is a daily reality for students who rely on schools for perhaps a warm meal and a safe space to stay. So let's check in right now to talk about Good Reason Houston. They are stepping in because the storm has reiterated the ongoing disparity in education. Joining us live to talk more about this is the Chief Public Affairs Officer, Cary Wright. Good morning to you. I'm glad you're here to talk about what's going on with this, because we want to know how trauma can highlight educational inequity.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa, for having me. And I just want to start by putting this most recent storm into perspective. If it weren't for the pandemic that we're all going through right now, this would have been one of the most collective traumatic events for our kids since Hurricane Harvey. Kids lost access to schools for shelter, for food, let alone all the important ways in which schools are helping them prepare for the future in terms of thriving academically and professionally.
When we take a look at this overall problem, do you see ways that schools can perhaps work harder or do something to better combat the problem?
Melissa, schools are already working so incredibly hard against all of these concurrent challenges. They're doing so much right now. Educators, school principals, school district leaders are doing so much to show up for their students while all of these overlapping crises take effect. So we know one of the things that has been a silver lining of all these challenges is that schools are actually creating more agility. Now that they can offer some high quality instruction online, it gives schools the ability to adapt on occasion when some of these crises come up. So obviously, when any of these events transpire, we want to do the best we can to get kids back to learning as quickly as possible and back to environments that are going to meet their nutritional needs, their safety needs, their shelter needs. And so we just stand in awe of all the ways in which schools are figuring out new ways to be agile and new ways to show up and support their students, no matter what the circumstances may be.
Oh, it's great to hear you say that, and we do see that ourselves in our own communities day after day. Now, let's talk about the fact that you said schools are pretty much doing everything they can. What can our community do? Do you see anything that just person by person we might be able to do something to try to make a difference?
Well, I think two things come to mind. First is for students. I think it's so important that we recognize that kids are just like adults. They have emotions and they have needs, and it's important that we help build their emotional literacy and their emotional resiliency. So talk to kids about what's going on right now. Help them contextualize and understand what happened last week, what's happening with the pandemic. It gives them a language, and it starts to help them understand their own emotions that may be driven by fear and all sorts of other things that are natural human behaviors. The second thing is, I think we got to continue to show up and support more resources for our public schools. One of the ways we can do that right now while the Texas legislature is in session is supporting more critical education funding. We've got a petition right now at change.org/Texas school funding that folks can join to show Texas legislators that it's so important that we continue to fund our public schools adequately to meet the needs of all of our kids, but especially our kids currently experiencing poverty and our children of color. You know, right now in Houston, if you are a student who identifies as Black, you're 4 times more likely to attend a public school that's rated D or F by the state of Texas. That's absolutely unacceptable, and our community needs to do everything we can to show up and ensure kids are getting the great education that they deserve.
Well, we're lucky to have advocates like you with Good Reason Houston trying to make a difference. Cary, thank you for your time and for this conversation, and hope we can continue this in the future.
Thanks so much for having us, Melissa, and we hope folks will join us at goodreasonhouston.org to stay in touch in our efforts to grow more great public schools in Houston.